Bourton-on-the-Water wears its loveliness without effort. Low stone bridges over the Windrush, honey-colored cottages leaning like neighbors, lamps that turn the river into a line of thought. By day, it is all postcards and picnic baskets. By night, it remembers other things, footsteps on church gravel with no one to claim them, a single odd brick that keeps its own counsel, alleys that tighten the air, an inn that does not always empty when the last key turns, and the river's soft breath as if someone were listening from just beneath the surface. Tonight we'll walk gently. 5 tales told simply, with room for sleep. If you grow drowsy, let the Windrush carry you. The village knows the way back. We will keep to old courtesies. Step aside on narrow paths, thank doors for opening, leave a little light where a light was once kept. Bourton will do the rest, as villages do, by lending us its patience and its quiet. He had come to Bourton in the still part of March, when frost threads the grass and breath hangs politely before choosing a direction. Call him Evan, a night photographer who liked the hour when churches return to themselves and lanes remember being lanes. He brought a tripod, a thermos, and the contentment of a man with one clear task: capture the Tower of St. Lawrence under the shy stars and lodge it neatly in a frame. Gravel underfoot made the agreeable sound of small things arranging themselves. Evan set his tripod by the lich gate, leveled his spirit bubble, and watched the Georgian cupola hold its shape against a rinsed sky. The medieval chancel crouched behind it, older, closer to the ground, as if keeping a private promise. He waited for the long exposure to do its patient work. Footsteps, not his, not a fox, not wind, the regular measure of someone coming up the path with purpose. He half-turned to make room, because one does. The path beneath the yews is a shared thought, and courtesy has momentum here. The steps advanced, steady as a clock. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Nothing. No lantern shape, no person. Only the sound of approach, and the air thinning in the small, courteous way. A body thins air by occupying it. Evan stood very still and felt his heart make the practical adjustment between explanation and acceptance. Evening, he said, because it seemed correct to say something. The next step fell closer. He could have reached out and touched the place it happened, no more than arm's length beyond his sleeve. And then the sequence stopped, as though a weight had been set down. Silence returned with the tidy confidence of a sexton closing a door. On his camera, the tower glowed faintly. The gate's ironwork looked like handwriting. He brewed tea beneath the yew and let his breath join the night's slower rhythm. A line of thought passed through him, uninvited. You step aside because someone always has the right of way here, even when you can't see them. A bell rope shifted inside the porch with the private sound of old hemp remembering a hand. The air cooled. Evan folded the tripod and moved to the path again, not to test anything, but to keep company. Under his boots, the gravel kept its grammar. He walked to the porch, touched the wood, and felt the faintest chill pass into his fingers, like fog that had learned manners. The second night he returned earlier. He kept the camera stowed and stood where the path narrows. The village had gone to roost. A single cottage window still held lamplight like a warm coin behind glass. Again, the steps began. He did not turn this time. He lifted his hat without thinking and shifted 2 paces toward the hedge. "After you," he said softly. The passing was not an absence so much as a shape cut from quiet. 6 paces measured, a 7th that paused, and the suggestion of cloth lifted carefully to spare a corner from the dew. The yews held their counsel. Somewhere a rook made a single remark, satisfied with the reckoning. Evan understood then that the path knew its work. It carried the living and rehearsed for the dead, and both acts required witnesses who did not insist on seeing. Later, in the White Lion's back bar, a woman with the confident calm of someone who has lived long within earshot of the church listened to his halting description and nodded once. "You heard them," she said, unbothered. "It walks the night before." She sipped. "Don't fret, you saw nothing. You weren't meant to. Being there is enough." On the third night, Frost drew neat white lines on the graves as if underlining names. Evan brought no camera at all, only a candle stub in a chipped saucer from the B&B, a private kindness borrowed from some older innkeeper's practice. He set it on the low wall by the lich gate and did not light it. The knight accepted the gesture without comment. Frost filmed the iron-like breath held. The yews leaned in, their needles ticking with the faintest ice. Far off, a dog gave a single conversational bark, and then thought better of it. Somewhere in the nave, a ridge tile pinged as it shed the day's heat. The village's lights withdrew one by one until the tower and the stars were speaking on equal terms, and Evan, cap in hand, not sure why, found himself answering under his breath, as you do in old places that feel awake. The steps came again, unhurried. They paused where he stood and seemed to consider the space he made. He felt what? Not approval, not gratitude. Something like a ledger, balanced with a soft stroke of the pen. "Go well," he murmured. In the morning, the bell tolled for a neighbor, as bells must. Evan did not claim knowledge he could not have. He only listened, hat in hand from the far end of the lane, and felt the path widen inside him as if someone had shifted a bench to make room. That evening he walked the boundary once more. A cat followed, believed to belong to no one. The tower watched without judgment. Frost made careful stars of the grass. The lane breathed evenly in the dark. He set the unlit candle back on the wall and, on an impulse, touched the cool iron of the gate as you might a friend's sleeve. When he left Bourton 2 days later, Evan did not take a photograph with him. He took instead a learned reflex. If ever a path narrows and the world feels briefly ancestral, he will step aside without being told. In certain places, courtesy is also a kind of prayer. He noticed it because it didn't belong. Everything else along Victoria Street had the local look. Cotswold stone in tones of toast and honey, mortar weathered to agreement, door lintels that knew which way the warmth lay. And then, halfway down a wall that had stood content for generations, a single red brick, not hidden, not apologetic, placed and left there as if to keep a thought from slipping. Tom was a mason's grandson, with the practical superstition of people who work with materials that will outlast them. He had come back to Bourton for a winter's rest, the sort of stay where you plan nothing beyond soup and walking. On the third afternoon, rain put a fine polish on the village. That was when he saw the brick and felt, unexpectedly, the tug of a half-memory. His grandfather's voice explaining how occasionally a wall wants a thing it doesn't have words for, and a good mason will give it that, even if it looks wrong. He touched the brick, lightly, the way you'd touch an animal that might bolt. It held a little warmth, though the day had no warmth to spare. The stone around it felt cooler. A ring of temperate air gathered like people edging politely back from a quiet conversation. "Odd, isn't it?" said a woman in a rain hat, appearing with the village's casual knack for materializing precisely when you start asking it questions. "That brick," she nodded, "always draws the eye. Folklore grows on it like ivy. Don't go pressing your ear to it after dark, mind." "Why not?" "You'll hear what you brought with you," she said cheerfully, and went on her way, umbrella ticking like a clock. That evening, the village closed its shutters against the damp. Tom walked past the wall again, unhurried, letting the rain arrange his thoughts. He carried in his pocket the smooth, thumb-worn coin his grandfather had pressed into his palm the day Tom first set a coin true. "For the job you'll never be able to name," the old man had said. "Every craft has one." He wasn't sure why he had brought it on this holiday, habit perhaps, but now the coin felt heavier, as if reminded of an appointment. Tom stood with his shoulder out of the drizzle and peered at the mortar. Older than the brick, newer than the stones, work done on a day of compromise in weather that asked for patience. He imagined the hand that set it. A journeyman called in after a settling, listening with his fingertips to the wall's intention, and then choosing to go against the grain. He left the coin on the low course beneath the brick. Not an offering, not payment. A test of courtesy. When he returned after supper, the coin was where he had left it, but ringed with a dark oval, as if lifted, weighed, and replaced a finger's width higher to spare it the drip from a projecting stone. "Right," he said aloud, softly. "So that's the kind of wall this is." That night he dreamed of straight courses and the small ceremonial tap that seats a brick. The next day he looked closer than is sensible for a stranger to look at another man's wall. He found, incised close to the bed joint, something that was not random. Two shallow scored circles, offset and overlapping, the faintest suggestion of a Marion mark. Protection worked into the job as casually as a breath. He felt suddenly protective in turn. At dusk, the brick looked redder, as if it had stolen daylight and kept a little for itself. Wet mortar smell hung faintly in the seam, although nothing had been repaired in years. When Tom splayed his fingers on the surrounding stone, he felt a mild vibration, the kind a kettle gives just before the boil. Carts went by, tires whispering. The wall seemed to listen and then settle, like a listener nodding at the right place. He stood again, and this time, yes, he leaned his ear to it. Not for long, not greedily, just enough to honor the rumor. What he heard was not voices. It was the small, convincing sound of work completed, the tap-tap hesitation when a craftsman senses a bed is almost, but not quite, right, and then the single, satisfied knock when it is. He straightened, relieved in a way that reached his shoulders. "Thank you," he said to the wall, feeling ridiculous and not minding. That night he dreamed he was back on a scaffold with his grandfather, the old man sighting along a course and saying, without turning his head, "Walls have tempers, same as people. You don't bully them, you listen." In the dream, the odd brick would not settle until Tom breathed out and set his palm flat to the bed. In the morning, he did exactly that. Stood in the lane, hand to stone, and waited until the feeling of a held breath eased. The rain hat woman passed again and gave him a look that said she had seen this sort of neighborliness before. "Better," she remarked, and was gone. By the end of his stay, he no longer checked for the coin. He knew it would be exactly where he left it, with the water ring kept off it by that considerate adjustment. On the morning he left, he set the coin once more beneath the brick and tucked into the arras a curl of pencil shaving. "For the job you'll never name," he murmured. The rain had passed. The village brightened. As he shouldered his bag, the odd brick seemed less like an intrusion and more like a held note in a chord, necessary for harmony. Some imperfections are not flaws, they're signatures. A single red brick can be the place a promise chose to live. She had taken the short way all her life. Born behind the high street, grown up with a paper round that ran like thread through needle eyes, she could cross the village in 7 minutes without touching a main road. By day, the passages were errands. By night, they were something else. narrow breaths between stone ribs where sound changed its mind. Mara came back to Bourton in late autumn to sort her mother's cottage. The ordinary archaeology of papers, gloves, and postcards kept for the corners of their stamps. People were kind. Pies appeared. Keys were pressed into her hand with the words, "No rush." Each evening, after 2 hours of the past, she walked the route the girl she had been used to run, behind the bakery, left at the yard with the iron gate that never shut, through the alley so tight 2 acquaintances couldn't pass without becoming friends. On the 3rd evening, she noticed the marks. Not vandal scratchings, not the clumsy initials of sweethearts. Circles, petals, overlapping lines burned shallow into lintel and jam. Apotropaic. The word rose from a schoolbook. Witch marks, protection. She remembered tracing one with a mittened finger when she was small and being told not to fuss. "They're to keep things out," her mother had said. Mara had asked, "What things?" "The ones that stay out when you don't invite them in. There are places that ask you to round a danger rather than walk through it." In the tightest alley, the air felt thoughtful, as if a decision were in progress. She paused and looked back. Nothing followed. Yet when she moved again, a second set of footfalls made a quick, efficient remark on the flags, 2 paces behind, light, certain, unwilling to be seen. She did not hurry. Hurrying is how you miss things. At the next lintel, a circle had been scorched with deliberate care. Within it, a small 6-petaled flower had been picked out by a sharper blade. Without quite knowing why, Mara touched the center with her forefinger and traced the blossom once round, slow as a clock hand. The close air grew easier, as if someone had opened a window at a neighbor's request. The echoing feet paused, then kept their distance. She slept soundly for the first time. In the morning, she found inside a drawer of recipe cuttings a folded paper in her mother's slow, school-taught hand. Marks to keep the bad out. Beside the words, small diagrams, circles, daisies, double V's, 6 for luck, 9 for stubbornness, chalk is fine, knife if you must. The note ended, in a different pen, you'll know when. That evening she walked later, allowing the village to thin to its winter self. The near footfalls were back, almost impatient. "All right," she said softly to the stones. "We'll do it properly." She took from her pocket the carpenter's pencil she had been using to label boxes, and where the marks had worn down, she renewed them, never on fresh stone, always on the place someone had chosen long ago. At each, she made the smallest circle she could that still counted as a circle, and at one paper white patch of lime wash, she laid a 6-petaled flower and breathed on it once to set it. The change was not dramatic. The alley did not breathe out. No figure showed itself to thank her. But the pace behind her slackened to something like good behavior, and when she reached the open lane, she realized her shoulders were lower. The woman in the newsagent's said without prompting, "Those cuts above the yard gate were my grandmother's." The postman added, "There's one alley wants rounding, not crossing." The landlord at the old New Inn said, "If you hear it close, draw a circle and step to the wall. It will pass on the other side." So she tried it. In the meanest of the passages, where lime wash came away in curls and the stars could not agree on a route, the steps behind tugged up close, rude as a draught. She knelt, and with the pencil described a neat ring on the flag. Then she stepped sideways until her shoulder brushed stone. The pursuing tread came on, met the circle and angled, cleanly as a respectful dog goes round a bed, past her and away. "Thank you," she said to no one in particular. At home, she laid her mother's note between the pages of a cookbook and slept with the window cracked an inch. Some time in the small hours, a soft touch woke her, the sense of a presence leaning in, curious, not cruel. "You'll find your things," she said into the dark, surprised at the words that came. The presence withdrew as politely as it had arrived. On her last night before handing the keys to the new owner, Mara walked the full length of the lanes, touching each old mark as if checking a latch. In one alley, a fresh sign had appeared, drawn in chalk, a child's round hand copying what an elder must have shown, 2 circles, bravely overlapped. She laughed quietly, felt suddenly companioned, and added 6 small petals to make the thing whole. The air there took on the faint sweetness of dust warmed by a nearby lamp. When she left in the morning, she did not look back. You cannot carry alleys with you. You hope they will keep themselves, which, if asked correctly, most places will. And if walking some city street months later, she hears quick feet 2 paces behind and feels a decision being made, she will draw a circle in her mind and step to the side. There are lessons you learn in narrow places that make the wider world pass more safely by. Lockup fell at 11 with the good manners of an old house. A sigh along the stair, bolts settling without complaint, pipes that knew the hour. Clive, lately assistant manager and not yet easy with keys, made his rounds with a little torch. The old New Inn was generous by day, all pewter and chatter. At night it kept its histories under low light. He checked the lounge, smoothing a ring from a table with his sleeve. He paused by the hearth because everyone paused by the hearth. Great stone cheeks, an iron bar that remembered bigger pots, ash that never quite cooled. Someone had left a chair angled to the fire in the way of men who mean to sit again. He straightened it, then left it angled again, because the room looked wrong otherwise, even to him. The old lintel kept the perfume of centuries of smoke, sweet, almost like apples, and the ash bed breathed a slow warmth that blurred the edge of the grate. Rain stitched at the windows, fine as thread. The house approved of small routines, chairs at angles, saucers on mantels, boots drying in ordered pairs. Upstairs, empty rooms kept their neutrality. On the landing, the carpet held a small hush. Clive listened. From the room above the lounge came the steady tread of boots. Cross the floor, pause, turn, cross back. Not a creak, not a pipe. Boots, patient as a sentry. He checked the ledger. No one booked in that room. He unlocked the door anyway, half annoyed at the prank the house was playing on his nerves. Nothing. The bed kept its hospital corners. The window was latched. The air smelled of polish and the faint clean dust that lives in wardrobes. He stood very still. The tread resumed, directly beneath his feet now, where the lounge ceiling lay. He laughed once, quietly at himself, locked up, and went down again. In the bar, he found Mrs. Ellis, who had worked there since the model village was new. She listened, set down a tray, and said, "Oh, him. He likes to check the line of the room." The line? From hearth to window. Left over from when rooms had lines that mattered. She tilted her head toward the fire. Leave the chair as it is. He sits there when the weather is dirty. Clive did as he was told. The chair kept its angle, making a triangle with the grate and the door. One wet Tuesday he found in a village history, a photograph of soldiers quartered at the inn. One sat by the hearth, head bowed, hands bandaged, a long scar visible under the hairline like a punctuation mark with nowhere to land. There was not much else to learn, only the look of a man resting where the heat is honest. The model village closed at 5, little gates locked with careful miniature clicks. After lights out, Clive walked through with a torch because it pleased him to see Bourton in miniature and still feel like itself. On certain nights, his step found company, a tiny rasp of gravel, the suggestion of a larger weight crossing a smaller world. He learned to stop trying to catch it in the beam and stood in the dark, listening to the little streets hold their breath. "Everything in order?" he asked to the cold air, amused at himself. He could have left it at fancy, and perhaps meant to, but houses have ways of organizing your sense of what is expected. The next week a storm came hard across the fields. Business was poor. Clive set the lounge to rights and, on a whim, placed a candle in an old saucer on the hearthstone, not lit, just there. It looked correct, as a napkin laid ready looks correct. The room changed its breathing. He felt it, as you feel someone enter behind you and know at once. "Sir," he said, keeping his voice at the level of a library, "warm yourself." Air moved, a small, contented adjustment, like a coat slipping off a shoulder. The draft that habitually stole toward the chimney drew back, as if giving way. Clive stood with his hands on the back of the angled chair and found, absurdly, that he had no wish to sit in it. He remained standing until the candle guttered without ever having been alight. When he took the saucer away, a shallow crescent of wax lay at the rim that had not been there before. After that, nights arranged themselves. If the weather blew hard, he left the chair angled and the saucer on the hearth. After lockup, a minute length of gravel would be pushed back into its tiny footpath, straight as a parade. He stopped mentioning any of it to Mrs. Ellis. She knew already and treated knowledge like linen, useful, aired on Tuesdays, folded away. Only once did Clive hear a voice. He had lingered too long at the miniature church. From the direction of the inn, both the great one and its pocket-sized twin, a man's voice said, as if agreeing with a private conclusion, "Right." It was a soldier's word, taught with relief. He went back to the lounge and found the chair no longer angled to the fire but set square, as if inspection were complete. Years later, when his keys had softened the leather of his pocket and he no longer apologized for the torch's squeak, Clive left the inn for a bigger job in a worse building. On his last night, he set the chair to its old angle, placed the saucer, and stood with his hand resting on the mantel. "Everything in order," he said, and felt the room nod. Outside, rain threaded soft through the dark, and in the garden a miniature river took the news quietly and went on its small way. It is not a story of drowning. Let us say that first. The river that runs through Bourton is clear as a kept promise and has a temper like any river, but this is a tale of keeping, not of loss. Ned came to the Windrush most evenings after the shop shut, walking the old path. He carried the string of ordinary worries that drag after a man: bills, a hinge that wanted oil, a letter that should be written. He let the noise of them be thinned by running water. Near the downstream bridge, he would lean against the rail and listen until the day set itself down. Even in near dark, the river kept its pale vocabulary. Little gleams caught in riffles, the faint quartz sparkle where the bed shallowed, a soft ticking where weed combed the flow. Ducks left stitched wakes that mended themselves at the bank. Lamplight bled into the surface and traveled with it, patient as a porter. He had been doing just that when a small tug took his sleeve. He looked down, expecting a dog's nose, a child's hand. No one. The tug came again, a polite insistence just above the cuff. He stepped back, and in stepping back saw that his toes reached the edge of slick stone where weed made the green glassy. "All right," he said to the air, surprised to find gratitude in his voice. Point taken. The tug let go. The next week, at the same place, laughter like a quick xylophone came from the water. Not cruel, not mocking. The sound a child makes when something small goes right. Ned knelt and saw only his face bent into the current. He put his fingers to the surface and felt a reach from beneath, no stronger than a minnow's push. Seeking acknowledgement, not taking. Word travels on water. An angler told him, "Don't lean." A woman with a pram said, "He'll mind you if you mind him." In the tea room, a postcard showed the bridge years ago with boys daring one another at the parapet. On the back, in fountain pen, a line, "Keep hold." A fortnight later, two visitors leaned with phones out to catch the exact angle that proves having been somewhere. Ned saw it before they did. The slick on the stone, the playful deceit of flow appearing still, the depth that always surprises the eye. He drew breath to warn them, but the tug came again at his own sleeve and a greater pull at his attention, as if someone beside him said, "Let me." The taller flinched and corrected his lean by inches. Neither knew why they had stepped back together. It did not matter who earned the credit, so long as the photograph was taken from safety. After rain, the river ran talkative. A scarf that had been hurriedly looped and carelessly knotted lost patience and slipped free from a woman's coat, making a slow, reluctant voyage toward a grate. Ned took 3 long steps, slipped, corrected, knelt, and reached. The scarf snagged on a reed stump and held. Something else held too, his balance, as if a firm hand settled at the small of his back and kept him from following. He sat down hard and laughed, not at himself, but at the familiar competence that had intervened. "Thanks," the woman said, breathless. "Not me," he answered, and left it there. Winter passed. Ned learned where the path iced, where wind played tricks, the hour when the village forgot itself and left, for a few moments, the old ways visible. He began a practice that would have embarrassed him to explain. When he came to the bridge, he set his hand flat on the stone and said, "All right." The way one salutes a watchman, one knows by sight. One evening he brought a small votive candle and a white saucer. He set them on the parapet and did not light it. The gesture was plenty. Air gathered to it. The current made its sentence and placed a comma in the reeds. He stood with his hand curved over the little flame that never burned and felt he was paying into an older account. A boy ran along the path, the careless gallop of 10 years old. At the corner, his heels skidded on thin ice and his arms windmilled. Ned was too far to catch him. The boy's chest stopped a hand's width from the rail, as if an invisible collar checked him. He stood blinking, surprised by mercy, and then looked to the water and said, in the flat, trusting tone children reserve for dogs and grandparents, "Ta." He went on at a saner pace. Ned wiped his eye with the back of his wrist and pretended the cold had blown it there. After that, flowers appeared some mornings at the same place. Never many, often cow parsley. Ned never saw who left them. He did not ask. The river kept its counsel, and so would he. On the first evening of spring, he walked down and found the rail pale with pollen. The water showed him his older face. He leaned briefly and felt no reprimand. "I've learned," he said. A laugh rose from the shallows, not unkind, and faded as ripples do. He set his palm flat, as always, and the stone under it felt a degree warmer than the air, like a hand that has just released another hand. It is not a story of drowning. If it is a haunting, it is the kind that keeps people standing, pockets keys that would be lost, and improves photographs because the taker has not leaned quite so far. If you pass late and a tug takes your sleeve, step back and say, "Thank you." The windrush returns courtesies without fuss. Bourton settles early. Bridges fold the day, one arch at a time. Doors rest. Hinges remember where warmth lives. If any small kindness followed you from these lanes, a measured step on church gravel, a brick that holds a promise, a warning given without words, let it lie on your pillow now. The windrush will keep the rest until morning. Sleep comes on soft feet in villages like this. Until our next walk, rest well. Please subscribe to this channel to be alerted to the next episode of Ghosts of the Cotswolds.